Welcome to the Page Turnerz Podcast, where book lovers unite to celebrate the enchanting world of fiction. With your host, Paul A. Brooks. In each episode, we'll dive into the captivating realms of storytelling, exploring the pages that transport us to magical places and introduce us to unforgettable characters. In each episode, we'll embark on a creative expedition through the minds of seasoned and emerging writers to unravel the mysteries and unveil the passion that fuels their stories. Join us on this odyssey through the pages and pixels of imagination, where words become worlds and stories illuminate our lives. So, pour yourself a coffee and immerse yourself in discussions about writing, gripping plots, heroes and villains, and the sheer joy of escaping into a well-crafted story.
On today's podcast, I had the opportunity to talk with David Dobson. Now, living in North Carolina with his wife and family, Dave has a very impressive publishing history. He's the author of computer games and puzzle card games, and he's also the author of the Frosthelm fantasy series, and one of his short fantasy stories is included in the Relics of Legend and Lore anthology. Now, he's written sci-fi, thrillers, and a children's book. Both traditionally published and as an indie author, it was a pleasure to talk and to learn from such an accomplished author. This is the outstanding David Dobson. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome. It's really nice to speak to you. I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah, this is great. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm appreciative that you had me on. So happy to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Now, you're in North Carolina. That's right, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I've lived here since 1997. So originally from Iowa, out in the big flat part of America, but now I'm closer to the coast. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, you've been there a long time, so hopefully you know your way around by now.
Yeah, more or less.
That's fun. Now, what's really great as well, and one of the reasons that I wanted to speak to you is because not only have you got some great books out, but you're a multi-genre writer as well. So you write sci-fi, thrillers, fantasy, and you've got a children's book out, which is a whole new kettle of fish, I think, certainly for me, from my perspective. So we'll talk all about that as we kind of go through. At least I'll get you to, and we can see them all around. Mind you, I can't see a children's book behind you. You haven't?
Yeah, I don't have that one up there, but yeah, it's called Can We Save Them? It was about endangered species.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, I said, we'll talk about that, but I'll get you to talk about all of your others as well as we kind of go through. But what I would like to do is to kind of talk with you through the creative process, your writing process, first of all, in terms of where you get your ideas from and all those sort of things. Because I think, you know, it's really interesting, and certainly from all of the other people that I've spoken to, we've all got different processes. So it's really nice to kind of know yours. So let me ask you, first of all, do you have a dedicated writing space? Do you have an office or something like this one behind me?
I do, yeah. For most of these books, it was the basement in my old house, but we moved last year. So now I have an above grade, upstairs writing space, which is a lot nicer because I can see the sun. And so, yeah, I have a desk with a big monitor because I'm getting older and it's nice to have the words nice and big.
Yeah.
And I'm a gamer too, so having a giant screen helps me.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really,
so it's really comfortable.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, just it's really comfortable. I've set myself up really well, I think, with lighting and all of that.
I'm the same. I've got a big screen here in front of me and a couple of little ones on the side as well. So it is nice to be able to sort of blow things up. Certainly when I'm editing, if I'm going, I like to have the words bigger. We'll talk a little bit about that. So are you a plotter or a pantser?
I am almost 100% pantser. I start at the beginning of the book and I finish at the end, and it all comes out, as it happens.
Yeah.
I have modified that some in my more recent books because I find that the pantsing works really well for me. Just sort of writing and then thinking what would be cool if it happened next, and then how would my characters respond. And that is great, but it can get you sort of lost. And so with my last few books, especially the ones that get more complicated in terms of multiple forces acting, I've gotten to the point where, you know how jugglers keep throwing balls up and then eventually it gets to be too many?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
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 Or you're spinning plates and you can't keep them all going. So yeah, when I feel like I'm getting to that point, sometimes I'll stop and I'll write myself a little, these 5 things need to happen and here are the issues I haven't resolved. And sometimes I just take out things that I've thrown in for fun that I'm not going to be able to work in. But other times that's really helpful because I know why I know that I've launched something that I like, but I don't really know how to catch that ball when it comes down. And
Yeah.
so stopping and thinking, okay, that I've brought this up. It needs to have some sort of satisfying ending, or it'll just look like a false start or something, a red herring.
Yeah.
So that really helps. And then I've done a couple of my books play a little bit with time. And once you start having multiple timelines going, then that gets very, very difficult to keep track of without notes and without diagrams sometimes. And,
I know exactly what you're talking about. I've just here, I've got notepads this side and that side. So like you, I will make some notes. I actually sometimes use some bullet points as well at the end.
Yeah.
So like you, I'm very much a pantser, or at least I'm sort of on we got plotter and pantser. I'm down this end, really on the scale. Do you find that you're ever a slave to your characters? They kind of dictate what happens.
Absolutely. The most joyful part of that sort of seat of the pants approach is that I very much love that the characters do and say what they want to and what seems reasonable.
Yeah.
And if I find myself trying to force them to do something, then I feel like I'm doing it wrong. So I do let them sort of think about what's happening or act in ways that might not serve, a plot, but is more realistic to what they do. And that I also have been doing improv comedy for about, I don't know what it is now, 18 years.
Right.
And so that sort of improv, and then it also relates to tabletop role-playing games and that kind of thing, which I also do. But where you're coming up with conversation and trying to make it seem natural, but it all is based on what's just happened, that's a much easier way for me to kind of let a scene develop rather than saying, okay, they have to discuss this and then they have to, walk over to this part of the room and then one of them is going to turn around. I don't do it that way. I actually just let the dialogue come and hopefully stay true to the voices of the characters that I've created, so that's the goal anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you've a couple of your books you've had turned into audiobooks as well, haven't you? So we'll talk about that because you've got a couple of different narrators as well. So it's really interesting to see how you've come up with the voices, or they've come up with the voices for the dialogue in those books. That's fascinating. But so we'll come to that. Do you have, in terms of your writing process, then, when you sit down to write, do you write for a period of time, a number of pages, a number of words? Do you set yourself a goal, or do you just sit, I suppose, until you've finished or your characters have done with you for the day?
Yeah, I usually write until I run out of what next, and then I stop typing, but I'll go off and have a sandwich or go to bed or something like that. And then for that time until I start writing again, I'm usually working on in my head, just what next,
Yeah.
What would be a good next scene, or what would these people do now? And once I have sort of an idea of what the next scene is, then I can sit down and write it. But I do run empty of that and need to kind of recharge sometimes.
Yeah.
I've written at very different paces. So Flames Over Frosthelm here was my first novel, and that took me 14 years. And then Got Trouble I wrote during a NaNoWriMo, the November writing month thing. And so I wrote the first draft of that one in 30 days.
Wow. Wow.
And I've done this new thriller I'm working on, and Daros I wrote about 3/4 of in a month. So another thing happened between those, which is that I stopped working as a professor and my kids moved out of the house. So both of those things gave me a lot more flexibility in schedule. But Yeah, when I do that sort of focused writing, which I have done in November, and then other times when I'm, really excited about a book or working on a self-imposed deadline or something like that, I can actually do 2 sessions a day, and I'll do one sort of usually afternoon, and then I stay up really late, so I'll do one after midnight, and that gives me enough time in between those 2 sessions to sort of refill that what's next buffer and think about what's going on. So yeah, when I'm going fast, I can do 3,000 or 4,000 words a day.
Wow.
Which in a novel like mine are usually around 100,000. So yeah, that is the fastest that I can go. And then Flames Over Frosthelm had a whole bunch of breaks as I was doing it, and then a whole bunch of rewriting and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my process is all over the place and evolves, and it's also, like everybody's, fits into my real life too in the ways that it has to. So
Yeah, I wonder if that is whether or not that's that kind of chaos, that chaotic writing style, really, which I have myself, is whether or not that's very much the pantser in us that does that. So that it is sort of less organized, shall we say. But yeah, I'm wondering about that. I mean, you were talking about rewriting. I was going to ask you about your editing process. For me, and I've said this before, what I'll do is I will edit really hard what I've written, for example, yesterday, and then continue on. Do you do something similar, or how do you do your kind of rewrites or your sort of self-editing?
I would say 95% of the time I just do a draft and don't go back and change anything. Except that sometimes I'll get to a point and I'll realize, oh, this would be really neat if I set this up better, or if I changed a little bit so that, this sort of arc that I've launched can land over here instead of where it was pointed when I just made it up. Because that's the problem with pantsing, is that you're like, oh, okay, that would be neat if there was a bad person here who just shows up and you don't even know who that is, and then you work on it, and by 4 or 5 chapters later you might, oh, okay, so that's who that is. And then you need to go back and kind of shape the way they appear and how they speak and that kind of thing. So I will do a little bit of back editing sometimes to smooth that, but that kind of thing is actually the thing I really like to do on a big editing pass after I finish the draft, is go through there, because I feel it's probably pretentious, but I feel it's a little bit like a sculpture that you've sort of roughed out, and then you go back and you're like, okay, the eyes need work, or this is kind of the wrong pose and I need to move the arm down a little bit. I don't know if that's a overblown metaphor or not, but
no,
but
I get it.
that's the kind of thing that is really neat. And then sometimes there are things that I threw in that I didn't know what to do with, and I don't do anything with them for a while. But by the time I get to the end of the book, I realize, because I've made a little note of all of my unresolved issues, and I'll be like, oh, wouldn't it be neat if that tied in this way? And then in the editing process, you can kind of run some of those threads through the whole thing, and make the characters have a secret motivation that would lead them to show up here and then here, and oh, then it all makes sense. And that's really a wonderful moment when you can take the chaos that you've put down in the first draft and start to thread it together. So I really like that part. But yeah, I'm very much a first draft, and then I do a second draft rewrite, and I do it pretty much beginning to end, and then I'll hand the book off to my wife. She's my reader number one. And then she gives me the book back. She likes to do it on paper, so I print out a spiral bound copy at the copy shop.
Yeah.
And she'll give it back to me covered with little sticky tabs, and every little grammatical error that I haven't caught, or a piece of unrealistic dialogue, or a character who's not realistic or doing something against their personality. She'll make a little note, and sometimes she just puts a little note, this was funny, or something like this. So it's not all, gloom and doom. And so that's a really neat part of our relationship anyway, is that she has that first look at it. It's kind of not fair, because she doesn't then usually get to read it for the first time as a finished product. So she's getting it, when it's still in its state of becoming something. But it's super helpful to me. And then I'll go through and take all her notes and do another big rewrite, and then I share it with a group of friends and people that I've sort of found over the years who can help me
Yeah. Well,
do
that
that kind of
great
final
process.
cut.
Yeah. That's that. What a great process that is. My wife does something similar. She dog ears all the pages when she's having
Yeah,
a read through. So when I get it back, there's a lot of dog eared pages,
yeah, yeah,
which is which is great because you're catching all of the error, not so much errors, but the changes that you might need to make at some point. Do you
yeah.
find that you have characters that you were talking about them earlier on when they have all of a sudden got a bigger part in your story than than you had originally thought of when they popped in?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And because I don't know where anything's going, usually I'll throw a character in and I'll try to make them interesting and maybe have a slightly different voice than, the people that I already have. And sometimes I will utterly fall in love with them, and then they become a big chunk of at least the next part, and sometimes an ongoing character all the way through. So yeah, the way I write is chaotic and unfocused, but it does allow me to kind of discover people as I go. And if I find somebody who's fun to be around, then I often will incorporate them more fully into whatever happens next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
there's a guy in Got Trouble called Jimmy that I just absolutely loved. And the more I wrote for him, the more fun it was. He's kind of an anarchist uh loner who lives in the woods that they run into, and he's just I had so much fun. It's very self-indulgent when you find one of these people that you like,
Yeah,
because you want to talk more about them and what's in their head and come up with funny things for them to say. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So how do you? I mean, you can see the books that you've written behind you. So how do you switch off when you're drafting? How do you switch off your critical mind? Because I find that quite tough to do, and I'll read back on a sentence or a paragraph, and I think, oh, that could have been better. Sort of the prose could have been a little bit more appealing. I kind of like my writing to sing, so to speak, so
Yeah,
it's easy to
yeah.
read. How do you switch your critical mind off if you're just doing the whole draft?
Well, one thing that helps is towering ego, because you don't see any flaws that exist in. No, I when I come back, because I do this sort of interrupted uh writing. When I come back, I'll go over the last, page or 3 or 4 paragraphs or something, and I will often tighten them as sort of a warm up to going, but usually not big edits or changes in plot, or I'll add description or something like that. I tend to skip description more on my first drafts, and focus on dialogue and plot and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But yeah, I often don't see problems in something until I've had some time for it to fade from my memory, and then I'll go back and I'll go, oh, this was weak, or nobody would say this, or that kind of thing. But in the moment, I'm so focused on the what's next part that I generally don't go back and edit it may well need editing, but I don't do that at that time. I
yeah,
usually I catch that before I give it to my wife, because I can go through the book again before she gets it. And there's often a lot of rewriting in that first kind of pass through it. But yeah, I guess I'm very sort of methodical and separate and don't like to shift modes,
yeah.
from writing to editing. I kind of like it all to come out first and then deal with whatever it is, which can lead to, things being bloated or falling in love with something that isn't really central to the plot, or, something like that. So there are risks with doing that. But yeah, but that's kind of how I do it. I don't know if it's good or not, but that's the
Well,
the
it works
tendency
for
that
you.
I'm drawn to. Yeah, yeah.
I suppose that's the most important thing. So where do you get your kind of? I mean, you've got thrillers, you've got sci-fi, you've got fantasy. Where does your sort of ideas come from? Do they just sort of pop into your mind, or are they through sort of observation of sort of everyday life? Where do you kind of get your ideas from?
Um, I would say nearly all of these books uh started with a scene, and I just wrote the scene and kind of tried to catch on to what the mood of the scene was, and then I throw things in that happen, and as I write one chapter and then another chapter and another scene, those will start to take shape. But I don't have a and it's been different with the different books. With the Inquisitors Guild ones, they all center around a detective agency in a sort of medieval-ish city. And so I knew that was the kind of book I wanted to write. And
Yeah.
Flames Over Frosthelm, the two main characters in that are both very fresh rookie inspectors who get caught up in a mystery that's way bigger than they should be dealing with. And I knew I wanted them to have a good sort of back and forth banter, but I didn't really know what they would find. I just treated it as a case where they're getting clues and processing them. And then, I had a little bit of an idea more than they did of what was going on behind the scenes, but I kind of let myself discover that as they went through it. And then there's a moment in there where there's sort of a prophetic, vision of the future. And then that's a thing that I had to get to or discard, so that gave me an idea of the arc of the book, where it was gonna land. And then Got Trouble, I started the month because that was the NaNoWriMo one, all done in November.
Yeah.
I started with it was basically I don't want to spoil it, but
No, don't.
what if there was a blank that did blank? That was the sentence I started with, except I had the blanks filled in. And then I just started with that idea and then wrote a scene and then wrote another scene and then wrote another scene. And eventually the blank came in and did blank. But that was the concept. That was it was 6 words or something was the concept. And then the story grew much bigger than the concept, around that as I got to know the characters. And really, that's a more character-focused book than a plot-focused book in the end, just because I really loved the narrator voice that I came to, and I found her to be just so fun for me to write more scenes from and to figure out, because she's a sort of a down-on-her-luck mid-40s gas station attendant who gets caught up in something much bigger than her, and she's in a marriage that's not perfect, and so that was a big shift from the sci-fi and fantasy stuff that I had been doing. So, existing in the real world and having to follow those rules mostly was also another challenge to getting that done.
That's great. So, I mean, it sounds very much like it's a totally organic process for you. Then you start off with a scene and it just blossoms and grows into something more.
That's a very nice way of describing it. You could also say it's completely unfocused and chaotic.
I think blossoming is
doing this anyway.
Right. So do you have a kind of a word count in mind for the length of the book, or do you just let it finish?
No, I do. I don't want to write, at least not yet, one of these 400,000 word doorstopper kinds of things. I like to read books, and that's another thing, is all of my books are self-contained. Even the ones in the Inquisitors Guild series that are thematic and in the same world, they actually all have different narrators, and each one is a mystery that starts and stops within the confines of the book. It's more like an Agatha Christie or something like that, where you might have characters that show up again, but they're actually separate cases and all of that. So I very much want a book to be not immense and also to be self-contained, and that pace so far has worked for me. With Traders Unseen, which is novella length, it's a lot shorter, 40,000 words instead of 100 or 120, which is what most of the others are. I did want to write something shorter because I had heard from other indie authors that having a book that ties into your series that you can kind of give away to give people a chance to see if they like what you're doing or not. And so I wanted to write a smaller case in the Inquisitors Guild series that I could let people have. It's novella, 40,000 words, maybe 40% of what the other ones are. So less happens, but it's a little more focused. And I did that intentionally. I had an idea. I didn't know if it was going to be, 20 or 50, but I knew I wanted it to be a little bit shorter taste of it so that people could give that a try.
Yeah, and it kind of brings them into your world really as well. It gets them to kind of know your style and that sort of. How long did it take you to write that? Because I have a novella as well, and I think it's probably about 40,000 words, similar to yours. It took me, I would say, probably a month to write, if not a little bit more, actually, if I'm honest. But, so for you, Traitors Unseen, how long did that take?
So that one, I had written. I'd written Flames Over Frosthelm over 14 years. That was a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I wrote Outcast Crown, which was the second one in the series. And I was still kind of I like the Inquisitors Guild. I want to write more, but I was waiting on my wife to have time to read Outcast Crown. So I was kind of stuck. And then I was like, well, why don't I start another one and shoot for this sort of novella thing? So I think I got the first draft of that one done in about 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah, I was on a sabbatical leave from my teaching job, so I had time to kind of focus on it, which is always necessary if I want to go fast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was January and February of that year. I got Traitors Unseen, the draft done, and then it took me a little bit longer to edit it and to work on it.
So, in terms of the Inquisitors Guild, the order that you brought them out in was Flames Over Frosthelm first.
Yep.
It was Outcast, Crown, the Woling. Is it Woling?
Yes.
Woling Lass.
And sorry, then Traitors Unseen. To get out of the room.
Yeah. That was great because you put your hand through that again. That was really cool.
The Woling Lass came. So Flames Over Frosthelm was 2019. Outcast Crown, I think, was 2020. And then Woling Lass was 2022.
Yeah.
I was doing one a year of those, but then starting to work on some other stuff as well. So Woling Lass and Daros, I think, came out the same year.
Wow.
Yeah. And sometimes I finish them, but it takes me a while to get back to editing them or working through them, because you go on a trip or another project shows up. I do these little puzzle card games also. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. So I've released 4 of those kind of in the middle of this, and I'll get caught up in doing one of those and then leave the writing for a little bit. But yes.
I was going to say that's really interesting because if you've left your writing for it, which is sort of the advice as writers that we're given, that you finish a manuscript, leave it. So it's sort of it sort of has time to mature, if you like, and then you come back to it and reread it. So when you're doing other projects in between and you come back to them, how do you find the writing? How does it? What's your first impression when you reread them?
Yeah, well, the towering ego helps with that too, because usually I'm like, oh, this is great. Why did I stop?
I love that towering. I've got to have one of those.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
No, it is. When I come back, I usually like what I've done, and it's been absent, out of mind for long enough that I'm rediscovering it, which is nice.
Yeah.
I don't always do the good advice that you were talking about, which is finish it and then leave it. Because, like Daros, there was a 4 or 5 month gap where I was just focused on other things. What Grows from the Dead, the one that I'm working on now, I wrote 70,000 words in November, and I didn't get back to it until the fall of this year. So I just had 10 or 11 months in the middle that I didn't even look at it.
Yeah.
I had gotten to a point with that one where I didn't know how to end it. And I realized I was stuck at sort of near the climactic sort of scene. And I didn't quite like how I was doing it, but I couldn't, even though I took a couple runs at it, I couldn't figure out, okay, how is this going to resolve in a way that's true to the character, that's interesting, that's satisfying, And so leaving that one for most of a year and coming back to it actually helped me, because I could read the whole thing again and it was new, and I could kind of see my way through. It would be if I just tweak these couple of things earlier, then the scene that I'm stuck on doesn't need to be the way it is when I'm stuck. I can actually come through it in a different way. And so that was very helpful. But it wasn't finish the whole thing and then set it aside. It was very much I suck at this. I'm going to put it down for a little while, and then get distracted and come back to it when I had some more time. And now I'm really into it. I like how it resolved. But yeah, there are moments where you kind of get yourself, I don't know, stuck or down the wrong path or something like that. And it can help, for me anyway, to take a little bit to take another run at it a little bit later.
Yeah. So are there going to be more for the series Inquisitors Guild then? Have you got something else sort of?
Yeah, well, that's the good thing about it, is that I can add more, or I cannot, because they're all self-contained. Anytime I feel like, I haven't done an Inquisitors Guild book in a while, I can go back and do them. But I don't have a promise the way a sequential series would have. The story won't finish, like the George R.R. Martin problem. The story won't finish if I don't write more. And no, because I'm doing them with separate narrators and as a closed case, then I can kind of do as many as I want to. I got excited about the sort of sci-fi with Daros and the thrillers. So now, because I'm sort of rotating between fantasy, sci-fi, and mystery thriller, I don't, my first 3 were all fantasy and all Inquisitors Guild, and now I'm sort of sampling from other areas. And so, yeah, I think I will do another one, but I haven't made a promise to the readers like you do when you have a series to finish. But doing a whole bunch of them in a row is tricky, because it's you get to do cool things like develop the world and figure out more about how the Inquisitors Guild works and what the political system of the society is and what their technology level is. And Welling Glass, a bunch of it happens in the countryside as opposed to in the city where the others do. So, you can do that kind of thing. But you do need to come up with something fresh, or you're just kind of using the same tropes and the same kind of events over and over again. And so for me anyway, it helped to kind of clear the palette and do some other kind of writing for a while. Even there are common elements in all of these. They all have sort of plucky central characters who want to do good in the world. Like I don't like anti-heroes very much, so I always have to have somebody I can cheer for in my books. And then I like quirky side characters and that kind of thing. So there's a flavor, I think, that isn't all of them. But yeah, stepping away from the Inquisitor Guild for just a little while, I think, has helped me kind of try out some other things and give me time to sort of come up with a new case or a new idea, or just write a scene and see where it goes. I would like to do another one, but I don't have to, the way I've set it up. So just whatever I want to do next is usually what I'm after there.
I think I read somewhere, I don't know who wrote it, but it went that if there are no surprises for the writer, there's no surprises for the reader. And if there's no tears for the writer, there's no tears for the reader. So I understand what you're saying by having, to bring something fresh to a series that is revolving around the same sort of world. And so I kind of like that idea of stepping away and then coming back, just to allow those ideas to brew a bit more, which is good.
Have you ever in your books had a moment, you talk about the tears of the writer, where you've been misty-eyed or?
Oh yeah.
In the Welling Last, there was a scene that just killed me at the end. And I was crying while I wrote it, and every time I edited it, I was crying. And it just felt like the most self-indulgent kind of thing to be moved to tears by something you made up. I mean, it was like so silly. But and I don't know if anybody else reacted to it the same way or not. But for me, I was just like, oh, this guy has been through so much, and now this has happened to him, and oh, it's so awful, And so, and I've had that, that's the most intense, but there've been other moments, you try to have moments of big emotion in a story, and then also jokes that you laugh at. But yeah, it's all part of that towering ego thing. You think your stuff is good, so you respond to it.
I try not to. My wife did actually that same thing. Actually, I try not to tell her too much about, just kind of forewarn her what it's going to be about. and
Yeah.
she'd be reading it, and I was sitting in there with her while she was reading, and also she went, no, because I'd killed off a character that she hadn't
Yeah.
kind of expected. I know I'd foreshadowed it, quite a few chapters before, and sort of
Yeah.
winding up to that. But it was still that shock. And I remember when I wrote it, I thought, wow, God, it really? She's got to die here? And yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that's the kind of idea. Yeah, and I'm the same when if I've written a scene, because in my sci-fi there are some quite violent scenes.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I've written it, it's almost taken my breath away. And you think, oh, blimey, that's wow, it saps your energy.
Yeah.
So so like you say, I hope that comes across when someone reads it, and I think so far, touch wood, it
Yeah.
has. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. Why, when you switched from, well, you wrote Daros at the same time as you wrote, what other book did you say?
Well, last I was kind of working on them side
Okay,
by side.
yeah,
Although
so
never, same day or same week even.
yeah,
Just, same year I was doing those and kind of skipping a little bit between them in the editing process and that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, that's really cool. That's really interesting as well, because that book, Daros, you've had it created as an audio book as well, haven't you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I wanted to try doing audiobooks, and so I had done Flames Over Frosthelm as an
yeah,
audiobook with a British narrator, Simon Dedenne,
yeah.
who I thought did a great job. I felt like a British accent would be more appropriate
I was going
for
to ask you.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they are more the sort of classic fantasy style in
mhm.
terms of, snowy medieval city thing, which is fairly Eurocentric, and so I thought having an American read about that would be, less less good. And Simon was he's a British actor actually, and has moved to do some audiobook narration, and he was able to take regional accents from the British Isles to kind of distinguish some of the different characters from each other, which I thought was really fascinating, because I
Yeah,
know a fair amount of the diversity of British accents, but he had, people come in, and we went back and forth on some people where I thought that's too thick. I can't understand that so easily, and he would tone it down or change it. And then there's a couple characters in that book who are foreign to the land that it takes place, which of course is made up, so it's
yeah,
not an actual place. But
yeah.
he kind of went for a more Eastern European accent for those people because they had come from a different place, and that totally
Interesting.
fit. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah,
Kind of working through that with him. And then so I released that one on audio. With him, there's a group called ACX, which is an Amazon company that
yeah.
where authors and narrators can kind of find each other. And so with Simon, I did a revenue sharing thing because I was totally new to it, and it's very expensive to do an audiobook
Yeah.
sort of straight up. And I wasn't sure, if it would sell enough, but I had enough money to try. But the revenue sharing meant that I could get Simon to do the book for a little bit less money, and then we would split the royalties afterwards. And then for Daros, I decided that because the sales for Flames Over Frosthelm were fine, but they were not making Simon as much money as he would have made at his normal hourly rate, and I felt a little
Sure.
bit bad about that.
Yeah.
So for Daros, I wanted Jennifer to get her money up front so that I wouldn't have this sort of potential that she might not get what she was worth.
Yeah.
So we made just a straight up contract where she would record that one, and she is a lifelong actor in various local theaters. I think it's Seattle mostly. She doesn't live there now, but she had all of these characters in her from that acting background. And Daros has all sorts of people in it. There's a lot of the people are aliens, because in that one it actually has alternating chapters with different narrators. The all of the Inquisitors Guild books except Wool and Glass are single narrator and chronological, so you kind of follow one person through it. They're mostly first person. But Daros, I wanted to try something different. So one of the characters is this smuggler's daughter who's about 16, and she's on her dad's ship, and then the ship they come to a planet to do something kind of shady, and there's this invasion on the planet,
Right.
surprise invasion by aliens, and their ship gets blown out of orbit, and she has to take an escape pod down to the planet. So she's stuck on this war-torn planet and has to figure out what's going on and
Yeah.
try to figure out if who she was supposed to meet, or if that even matters anymore. But I was writing her perspective as kind of the same sort of first person book. But then I thought, this is okay, but she doesn't really know enough, and she's not going to be in a position where she knows enough for a long time.
Mm.
And so when I left that one and came back to it, because I'd written the first 2 or 3 chapters, and then I dropped that one for actually about 2.5 years. When I came back to it, I was like, this really needs another voice. And so the voice I chose was somebody in the invading fleet, so one of the aliens. But then I thought, I don't want to write from the perspective of an awful person.
No.
So how am I going to do this? And so what I hit upon was the alien that you're following, who's in the invading fleet, is actually a secret rebel and doesn't want to be part of this force, but is trying to undermine it from inside. And so that was really cool, because then I have, Brekka doing her thing, getting stuck on the planet and trying to avoid all these invaders. And then you're actually on the fleet mothership, with this spy who's constantly worried about getting caught, and I could explore the alien culture and all that. So that was super fun. And then, I guess it's not much of a spoiler, but, figuring out how they might at some point come together and these two threads could connect was one of the neatest parts of that. And also the most terrifying.
Yeah.
Because if you don't make that, worthwhile and powerful, where you get these two voices that you spent a lot of time with, and they're suddenly together and having to figure each other out, that was really, that felt like the hardest writing that I've done, writing that scene that connected those two voices. That was very tough.
Yeah.
And I've used that. I did that in Woiling Last too. That actually, out of necessity again, because the main character is almost murdered and is whisked out of the city by his allies. But then he would be out in the country and unable to see anything that was going on in the city. And so I had to add another character who's a little sort of apprentice trainee inspector who could actually see what was going on in the city. And so they're able to come at this plot that's trying to kill him from different ways. And so that helped both of those books be, I think, a little more interesting.
Yeah.
And I've gone back to single narrator. Got Trouble's all single third person narration. Kenai, same thing, third person, one main character. And then What Grows from the Dead is. So I've been playing around with these two voices.
I think
The one I'm working on now is a comedic fantasy, and that has two voices who are just could not be more different, but they are together the whole time.
Yeah.
And that's a new challenge for me too, is having these two people see what's going on, and I alternate, and the plot progresses in each chapter, so they're sequential, but they are seeing what is happening just from completely different viewpoints. And one of them is brave and bold and overconfident and wants to kill everything. And her squire is this little kind of squeamish guy who's having to follow her around. I'm having a lot of fun with that too. Yeah.
But I think that those kind of things, that different points of view, they come naturally when you're working with two people within there. So, I think sometimes it might even be easier. I think, if you've got two characters, two different points of view, sometimes I think it's probably easier to put them together so that they can just kind of naturally gel. And I think it's really interesting that you said that a third character earlier on popped in that sort of pulled them together. So was that character somebody who sort of came in by surprise?
Yeah, well, in Daros, there's actually a third main character who doesn't get her own perspective.
Yeah.
Who's actually an AI ship, and
Yeah,
she
I'm gonna
has,
ask it. Yeah.
yeah. And so Brekka finds this ship that has this really snarky AI, which is a trope, but it's a good trope. So
Yeah.
And that character is one of the ones that is trying to has her own I I don't know if she has a gender or not, but I think of her as female, has her own sort of motivation that's separate from the other two. So you have this rebel trying to undermine the invading fleet. You have Brekka just trying to survive, and then there's this AI ship that wants to do a third thing. That again, I didn't know how it was related when I threw that voice in, but then it kind of combined, and she really brought the other two together, not intentionally, but really was sort of the glue that made that kind of connection work. And so, yeah, that third voice sort of snuck into that one.
Yeah.
But as a third party, which was interesting,
And it's
So you
really
look at
distinctive.
What's that?
I say it's really distinctive the way Jennifer's narrated the AI, the voice that she's used.
Oh, did you listen to some of it? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. She did such a good job with that because the AI is, yeah. And Jennifer, because a lot of the characters are actually non-human, she had a lot of fun trying to figure out how to voice these characters who were, not even human. It's not, and she does really good character voices for them. It's almost like, a cartoon kind of thing where you have voices for all of these different kinds of people. And so I asked a lot of her with that book. And the AI, Lyra that she does is just terrific. And the interaction between Brekka's, this teenager, and she had just a perfect kind of teenager voice for her. And then Lyra having to deal with a human teenager as this advanced AI, that just was, I loved how I wrote it, but she elevated it so much in the performance with the narration that it was great. And she has the big blustering, violent aliens and all of that going too, and really captured the sort of insecurity of the inner voice, and then just jaded desperation of this kind of rebel stuck in this society that she was born into and didn't really have a choice. So
it's great listening. It's really good listening. It's not, and it's very distinctive. It's very easy to pick out the character. She's done a great job with that.
Really, and that is, I haven't made the audiobooks a huge financial success yet. They're so expensive that it's going to take, a few years or many years to kind of make back the initial investment. But it does give you access to readers that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people who only read through audiobooks. And it gives you this really wonderful experience of seeing something that you created, interpreted in a new way. It's like writing a play script and then seeing the play happen, where it's just magical to see it in this other format. So that's been super rewarding, just to see, to listen to that. And you get it's really fun on the ACX thing because you get auditions from narrators. If you post your book, then you'll get 30, 40 people trying out for your book. Wow. You give them a little passage to read, or maybe a couple that show the different characters. And then, a combination of who you like and the price and all of that, you can kind of narrow down who you can afford, who you think sounds good. And in both cases, I was just blown away by the two that I eventually picked, and had such a good experience working with them.
Yeah. How long did it take then to record from sort of beginning to end? Was it a long, drawn out process?
Yeah, it takes quite a while. I think they both, because they are living beings who can't do more than an hour a day or something like that, or they'll blow their voices out, and they have real lives and all that too. But once they got going, it was I think a couple months for each of them to get through the whole book. And of course, they're going through edits and re-records, or if they sneeze in the middle of something, they have to redo it. And all of that I don't see, but I'll get the final their first draft, where they've edited and consolidated. And both of them did their editing themselves, although some people have technical assistants for that. They're usually the more expensive, busier narrator people have a producer or something along with them. But once they had it in shape, they would send it to me. I could listen through, and they were both very clean and very polished when they started. But there would be times where I found something that wasn't either a word that wasn't pronounced how I thought it should be. Uh, and I tried not to do too much of that. And we tried to have, I'd give them each a whole pronunciation list for all the names and aliens and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there would be times where I didn't catch one or something like that, or they went a different way with it.
Mm.
So that's one thing you have to resolve, which isn't very hard. If they've done Simon set me up really well. He did a sort of pre-recording set of voices that he had chosen
Right.
for each character. So once I hired him on, he actually went through and found voices for each character and said, "Are these going to work?" And then I was able to say, "Oh, well, that's great. I had imagined this one as a little gruffer, or this one is, sillier, or something like that." And I did the same kind of thing with Jennifer, with Dara. So yeah, that was a really fun part of it too. It was something that it was eye-opening for me just to see how that process works. But yeah, and then when you hear the thing, it's neat. You have to listen carefully, not as a relaxed thing. You have to make notes if there's anything that they've missed, or a section that they don't have. In both cases, I found errors that I should have caught on editing,
Ah.
and I was able to go to them and say, "I messed this up. Can you say this differently? I'll change it in the ebook." Which is shouldn't have happened, but it also was
It
part of
does.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I then so Daros and Flames of Frosthelm, those are the two that you've
Yeah.
had turned into audiobooks as well.
Yeah.
Can I is that your latest release at Sci-Fi?
Yeah, that one is just from last June, and it's been out since then. It's making its way through the self-published science fiction competition, SPSFC, which
Oh,
Daros was also in.
yeah.
And I also have been in self-published fantasy blog op, which is an even bigger indie fantasy competition with several of the Inquisitors Guild books.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun, and it's a really great place to meet other indie authors and bloggers and that kind of thing. So yeah, Kenai's in the semifinals now, so I don't know if it'll progress, but yeah, but that's the most recent one. And then I'm working on What Grows from the Dead now, another mystery. And then this fantasy one will be after that. But
Wow. So you've got quite a lot going on, really, I suppose. And I suppose, again, it's really nice that you're kind of working with different genres as well. It gives you sort of fresh eyes when you look back at what you've written to continue on. That's great. What's Kenai about? Could you give us a little bit more information on that one?
yeah. So that's there's a former space marine. The woman on the cover here, Jessamiko, is trying to put her life back together. She's working as a security guard at an archaeological dig on this planet called Kenai, with a scientist who's exploring ruins of a long extinct civilization, non-human civilization.
Mhm.
And so that's the setup, is that they're down there. And then she has this sort of troubled background. She's been in prison and is coming out of that, and can't go back into the patrol, which is this military organization that she was in, and she doesn't have skills other than that, so she's just signed on to this. But then things start to get weird on Kenai, and they realize there are other humans trying to do things that aren't what was agreed to in the mission.
Yeah.
And then strange sort of anomalous things start happening on the planet. And then she is stuck down there and ends up having to use her marine skills to survive, and then to figure out what's going on. And it's really a book with kind of three parts of the plot, which are sort of different, which I think some people like and some people find a little bit of a challenge, because the first part is very much military sci-fi, and then it shifts sort of in pace and tone to sort of a planetary discovery, almost first contact kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then there's another part which is sort of conceptual sci-fi that comes afterwards. It's military all the way through. You're following the main character as a Marine, and she responds to all of the stuff the way a Marine would. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was a fun part of writing that one. And so yeah, and she ended up being, I hadn't done a character who had such troubled background before. And so figuring out how she got there and what impact that past had on her was really one of the fun parts. And I do a little bit of that with flashbacks in the first part of the book. I don't need them really because you know her by the second half of the book. But going back to her time in the service and then in the mercenary group she was in after that, that is part of that story too, is figuring out how she's gotten into this situation on this weird planet where everything is going wrong.
Do you find, thinking about the differences now between your sci-fi and your mystery and thrillers, your mystery and thrillers, they set here in present day?
Yeah, they're both modern day North Carolina, actually. So
yeah. So how do you
Central North Carolina, right?
I was going to say, how do you find changing your mindset from trying to create a world and technology, etc., in sci-fi to then bringing it back down to earth, so to speak, in present day?
It's so interesting because there are parts of it that are far easier because people live in the world that these books are set in, and so you don't have to explain the banking system or how taxes work, or there are guns in gun shops, or the highways exist, and in a fantasy or a sci-fi world you have to explain all of that and come up with it and invent it, and it needs to be kind of cool or it'll be boring. And so there's less work doing all of that kind of world building. And so the books actually are a little bit shorter because you don't have all of that stuff to work through and to deliver to the reader because they already know it all.
Yeah.
But the other big challenge, and the one that I didn't really expect, was you need to follow all of the rules of reality. So in What Grows from the Dead, and they run into trouble with the police. So I had to look up how the police actually work, what the uniforms would be like, how they would approach a search warrant, all of these kinds of things. Because if you get that wrong, there's going to be somebody reading the book who knows that is wrong, the same way I do as a geologist. I'll look at a book that gets climate totally wrong, or ice ages, or mining, or underwater stuff. Like all of those undersea movies are usually just totally bogus. And I have the expertise to know that they're doing it wrong. And I am panicked with my present day books that I will do something so foolish just out of ignorance that people will read and be like, oh, come on, you can't even do that if you're a lawyer, or something like that. And so that's the big challenge that I kind of didn't expect. So there are ways where it's much easier because you can just assume that people know what it's like to live in the society that you're writing about, because they do. But you also have to kind of get yourself enough expertise. I don't know much about guns, and so I had to go back to a high school friend who was super helpful and got trouble. And not only on how do the guns work, how would you load them, what's a good kind of gun that she would discover, but how do people who are around guns think about them?
Yeah.
Because I had originally written her as very safety conscious and always checking to see if the gun was loaded and if the safety was on. And he read through a draft of those scenes and was able to say, I get that she's careful, but nobody is this careful, and you don't need to be this careful. And so that was very helpful. But that was a thing that without him, I would have gotten wrong. And somebody reading it would have been like, oh, come on, nobody would feel that way. And so, you do have to stretch yourself. In a sci-fi or fantasy world, if you don't know how guns work or how people react to them, you just make it up. And of course you would, check the puzzle and make sure that the cells are charged, and everybody will just accept it because you're making up the world. But in the present world, that's a lot harder to get the details right.
Yeah. So all of the books that you've got that we can see on the screen now, they are all available on your website, aren't they? And I'll put...
almost. This one's coming out probably in about a month.
Okay.
But all the others are published. And Flames Over Frosthelm and Daros are on audio. The rest of them are all paperback and ebook. And then I'll have another fantasy one out, hopefully by about May. That's mostly written. I just have to finish the editing on this one before I can dive back into that one. So
that's good. I'll make sure that your website's the URL for your website's in the description anyway, so people can go there and have a look and see what you're doing. I would like to talk about the children's book. So these books
Yeah,
that you've done now, your sci-fi and your mystery thrillers, they are all
yeah,
self-published. You've done those yourself. Um,
right.
you wrote a children's book that was traditionally published,
Yeah,
and it's called "Can We Save Them?" Isn't it? That's the
yeah, that's right.
children's book. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about Charles Bridge, who published it, and how that came about. So if you could start off with telling us what the book's about.
Sure. Yes. This is a tale of nepotism at work. So that is the preview. Um, yeah. So I was in graduate school at that point in marine geology, which was my specialty. Charles Bridge is a company that is run by my wife's family.
Uh-huh.
So I had that family connection to it, and
Good.
they had put out a book uh, called Will We Miss Them?" And it was written by an 11-year-old. So it was a child author writing about endangered species. And that's sort of a sad question, will we miss them
Mm.
when they're gone? And so she went through a whole bunch of species that were on the brink of extinction and wrote about them as, from her perspective. And the book did really well. It won some awards. It got a lot of attention because she was so young. And then so the company was excited about the book and they wanted to do a follow-up. But she was no longer interested in writing because she was now, in the middle of teen years in high school and didn't want to do another one.
Yeah.
And so they knew that I was a scientist and, asked if I'd be interested in maybe seeing if I could put something together for this. And I thought that would be really fun because I've always loved writing. And I was writing short stories and things back then. Also, trying to avoid my regular job, which was swirling little tubes of mud around all the time. Yeah. So yeah, that seemed like a really fun project to take on. And so I wrote a couple of example pages and they liked them. And so then I got to work with a really great editor and go through that whole process of writing. And children's book writing is, so much shorter and you have to make different choices with language and pacing in order to make it accessible to, your target audience who's not necessarily going to have the vocabulary or the, you can't be as subtle as you might be, although you don't want to be boring. So I tried to write it with some humor and then it just by its nature was a little bit more positive than the book that came before. It was "Can We Save Them?" as opposed to "Will We Miss Them?"
Yeah.
So I went through a whole series of animals that it looked like we might be able to help avoid extinction and what we could do to, to help them go forward. And so I wrote all that, went through the editing process. That took about a year, maybe. And then they had to find the illustrator, Jim Needham, who did a great job with all these animals I'd picked out. And then, so that was, I don't think I would have had the opportunity if I hadn't had the family connection to the company. So that was, lucky or however you want to call it, nepotism. But it was a really fun project to be involved with, and it got me a lot more knowledge and information I wouldn't use for a while, but about how the publishing industry works and all of that. So yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't understand or don't know the difference between traditionally published, like "Can We Save Them?" with a publishing house, as opposed to an indie publisher or a self-publishing where you've literally got to do everything yourself or hire people to do it. So I think in that respect, it's a lot more stressful to publish it to yourself because you've got to find the editors, you've got to make sure you trust that editor enough to accept what they're saying. You got to find cover designers and the whole gamut of people, and of course then you've got to promote it yourself as well.
Right.
So it's an awful lot of work that goes in.
Oh yeah, there's so much more to do. Of course, there's also there's a much lower barrier to getting it out to people. So that's the trade-off, is that you're doing all the work of a publisher, but you're also, the book can, you can upload it and press publish, and then within a couple of days anyone in the world can find it, and that is the the really cool part of being able to do it yourself. And then, like you're saying, there's also a lot of stuff that can be really fun, but all of these tasks to come up with the editing, the cover design, the marketing, website design, all of that kind of stuff, doing podcasts, that kind of thing you need to organize on your own. And so I had a background in self-publishing. Actually, I published a pretty popular shareware video game called Snood back in the 90s and 2000s. And shareware was, a lot of games are done this way now, but that was where you put the game out, and if people like it, they send you a little bit of money. And so Snood, eventually it had about 50 million downloads and was kind of a big deal. Got mentioned on The Sopranos and 30 Rock and some other TV shows. So I had that experience of kind of doing it on your own, and customer service and that kind of thing. Although that rapidly got that was just, I guess, really lucky for me to have that kind of experience then. But yeah, that helped when I got to both the puzzle games and the books. I had some experience kind of just going out there and forcing myself on the world, if that's what you think about it, and solving some of those problems of like, how do you find places where people go who might be interested in what you're doing? How do you phrase, ad copy in a way that is going to make them interested in it? How do you work with partners in terms of like the audiobooks and graphic designers and that kind of thing? And so that was some good practice, even though I wasn't publishing books back then. I had a little bit of background in terms of that, and I knew, LLCs and business taxes and that kind of thing too, which otherwise you would have to discover, because you have to be your own accountant and all of that also as well.
Yeah, I think that's the bit that people don't see. If you look at it as an iceberg, they just see the tip above the water. They don't see all of the marketing and the stress and struggles that come with that. Because most of us, we're just writers, we're not marketers. So as you said, putting yourself out there, for a lot of us, a lot of writers are introverts, so they find it quite hard to put themselves in front of the camera or put their face out there in a lot of cases. So it's quite daunting in a lot of respects, and I've said this before. Writing the book is the easy part. The rest of it, it gets a lot harder in that respect. So changing something very slightly from what you've done in terms of your books, on your website, you've also got some artwork that you created in Midjourney.
Oh yeah. I got deeply into Midjourney when it first came out.
Yeah, so did I.
I found it fascinating. It's obviously problematic with how it is kind of stolen art from actual artists, and then the ways that it's being sort of used, I think could be pretty damaging. Like any of these AI things, people worry about it for writers also. I just found it interesting. I have no artistic skill myself. And so being able, and most of my prompts were just ridiculous, and kind of getting the computer to draw these ridiculous things was the part that I had a lot of fun with.
Yeah.
I don't want to use it in anything that I publish, because I certainly want to, I'm an indie artist of one type, and I want to support indie artists who do cover design and kind of thing. I don't want to read books that are written by generative AI, because I don't think ChatGPT has any sense of what it's like to be human or to experience emotions. But that doesn't make the technology not really interesting. And I've always been sort of a tech nerd. And so the combination of a skill I didn't have with this sort of way to get a computer to do something, I just found really neat. I haven't done much with it since then. But yeah, that was, I played around with it when it first came out, just because I was fascinated with what it could do and what it couldn't do. And it can't make good art usually, but it will do almost anything you ask of it quickly. And it's doing it all with stolen, artwork. So it's more compromised, and it's very, very, it's having some insidious impacts on publishing and marketing and all of that kind of stuff too. So I went through this sort of evolution of, wow, this is neat and shiny and fun to, just play with.
Yeah.
What does this really mean? And so I've taken a different sort of, as I've thought about it more and sort of seen what the negative things that people are doing with it. I published through Kindle Unlimited, and there was a moment in the middle of last year where somebody had figured out how to do just these junky ChatGPT generated novels.
Yeah.
They had fake Kindle Unlimited accounts, and so all of the bestsellers on Amazon were terrible novels with made up names and PowerPoint level covers, and yet that was the whole bestseller list, and they were getting all of the money from Kindle Unlimited for a couple of days. So it's obviously tremendously disruptive and open for abuse.
Yeah.
But the technology is still interesting. And I'm not somebody who wants to say, I mean, art is what we do to make us happy as humans. Why would we want a computer to do that thing that we do with joy? When we have time and resources and a full tummy, we can make art. That is, or music, or write, or any of those kinds of things. Why would we outsource that to something else? But yeah, so I've had kind of a weird interaction with that. But yeah, I found it fascinating and had a lot of fun playing with it. But I would not use it for anything that.
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I'm the same. I've spoken to a couple of people about it, sort of 3 or 4 people on previous podcasts.
Yeah.
And I was saying to Jenna McLeod, which was I spoke to her last week, and we were talking a little bit about AI, and she said that she's more a purist. She wants the work to have come from her rather than from AI, which I kind of agree with. But then Keela DeMar, she uses ChatGPT to give her some seed ideas. I mean, she may not use any of those at all, but I think, when I said to her there at that point, I think if you're at a sticking point, then it could be really useful to give you a direction to get out of this writer's block, so to speak. But I think, like you, I think it could be very dangerous. It could be because, where's the originality? The originality comes from us, really, not from something computer generated. So I think in that respect, but however, it's here. It's a technology that is potentially useful for us as writers. So why not take advantage if we can?
Yeah, and I have used it to create a sort of a visual suggestion. So I will say this: I have used it to create sort of a visual suggestion. I've worked with a couple of cover artists. I did that with Kenai, and the image I gave my artist there, I was like, I kind of want a space marine on a landscape, and I had, I did a couple rounds of Midjourney, and what she has here is beautiful and looks nothing like what I sent, but I was able to give at least a sort of a template of, this is the kind of image I'm imagining. And so I felt a little weird about that, but I was paying an actual artist, and what she did was far better and neater than whatever spat out of Midjourney. But it was useful, I guess, in that sense because I can't draw what I want. I could describe it in words, but art's a visual medium, and so having something, but it doesn't remove you from all of the kind of moral quandaries of, and then there are folks who are absolutist, and that's a perfectly defensible way to be, who don't want anything to do with anything that AI ever touched.
Yeah.
And you're reminded almost of religious fervor in that kind of sense. And so it is hard to sort of figure out what role it's going to have in the world, what role it should have, or if it should have any role at all, as a tool or not. I was trying to get a cover design for my next fantasy book, not one of these up here. And I found an artist who had done some great work, and I said, this looks wonderful. And I just wanted to check, are you going to use AI, either stock images or, and then she canceled the order. Because I said I didn't want it, so I was left with a bunch of money stuck in Fiverr, so making that choice to not have that obviously ruled her out, even though I loved the covers that she had designed, and I think she was using it for, to fill in textures or backgrounds or stuff. But where do you draw the line as to what you're going to accept versus not accept, and how will people perceive that who see it? Tor has gotten into tons of trouble for using AI generated stock images with Christopher Paolini's covers and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of people in the SPSFC who are facing the financial challenges of being an indie publisher, who just had Midjourney draw them a spaceship for the cover and then just went with that. And they're making an informed decision, hopefully, about how to use it. That's a different decision than I have made, but is one that is kind of what they had to do out of financial necessity. But then are you like, is it moral or is it not? Is it I don't know.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes. I mean, it's here.
Yeah.
It's not going to go anywhere. I think it can only improve. But I think, as you say, like you, I'm a little bit not afraid to use it, but afraid to put it out there under my name potentially.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a little bit reluctant like that. But it's here, so we'll see where it goes. And then because I think it will become a little bit more prevalent. I think people will use it more and more. What it's going to do to the publishing industry now, I think the technology has caught up enough to realize when there's something that's been AI generated.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where it goes next, really. So
yeah,
what's next for you?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I would never use it in my writing because I love writing and I want the writing to be me. And so it seems a little presumptive of me to say it's okay to use it in art, which I can't do very well. And so that's tough. Yeah. I think, to me, the societal answer, it would be great if people could, if there was something like a universal basic income, so that you had the support if you wanted to be an artist.
Yeah.
And didn't need to work on commissions. You could just create what you wanted to create and share it with the world and not have to worry about whether you had health insurance or food on the table or that kind of thing. Same thing with indie authors. There's a financial barrier, even with the low financial barriers to indie publishing, to getting your book out there, to advertising, all that kind of stuff. If you could know that you could live and that you would have an income, which modern Western societies can certainly afford, if you had your basic needs taken care of and you wanted to spend your time working on your art without worrying about making it have to support you.
Yeah.
I think that would be a better society, and we would have more good art and more freedom to create. And then we wouldn't have to worry so much about, is AI taking away jobs, because our creation and our art wouldn't be jobs, they would be passions, which I think they should. So that's kind of where I've come around to it, is that it's messing with society in a way that society is already broken. And so sort of thinking about that from a sci-fi world, what would be a better society that we could shift to, where we could make these issues go away without ever even having to force them to put us into conflict. I don't know. That's just where
it's really interesting. It is. I think right now it's all kind of doom and gloom with AI, really, isn't it? In terms of people's thoughts on it. But it'd be fascinating to see where it goes in the next few years. So finishing off for today, Dave, because we've been talking quite a long time, which is great. What's next for you? And you said you're in the process of writing another book at the moment. Can you give any details on that?
Yeah. So this one, this is one I'm just finishing up. I'm about to send it off to my final copy editor, who's great, and she'll turn it around pretty quickly. So I think I'll have that one out in March. It's a story about it's a not autobiographical, although somewhat congruent with my life, story about a professor who is dismissed from his institution and not dealing with that very well. And so it is a former professor, as I am, but he's had a very different path. But then he discovers something that his mom has left him. His mom has recently died, and that starts to throw his life into a completely different kind of turmoil than the job and other stuff. And it ends up, I don't know if you've ever read any Harlan Coben, But I really love some of his books because they are sort of normal people who just get involved in things that become bigger and bigger and worse and worse. And
Yeah.
so that's the kind of story of that one. And then I have another fantasy book which isn't part of the Inquisitors Guild, but that one is about 3/4 drafted, and that's what I'll do next. And I'm hoping to get that one into this year's the 10th annual SPFBO, the self-published fantasy
Yeah.
competition, and it's in some ways a return to Flames Over Frosthelm because it's a buddy story and it's trying to be really funny. I always try to be funny. I don't know how well I succeed. My kids would tell you almost never. But it's meant to be that sort of humorous fantasy that I started with, and I'm having a ball writing it from these two disparate perspectives. So that one I hope to have out later in the year. And then I've got another sci-fi story set in the same universe as those two, but again with different characters and all of that I think I'll try to get back to later in the year. But that one's just a long email of a plot idea that I have sent to myself. So we'll see how that goes.
So your next one out really then is What Grows from the Dead is out in March.
Yep.
So we can look forward to that. So that'll be on your website as well once it's released, presumably.
Yep. Totally.
That's good. So what I said earlier on, I will make sure that there are links to everything so people can connect with you and find out more about you and get in touch and join your newsletter. That's the important thing as well.
Sure.
Of course, buy your books. Dave, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you. With all of the work that you've done, I certainly look forward to reading a lot more.
Oh yeah, and we didn't get to talk about your book so much either, but I think the idea of this alternate history and alien influenced evolution, all of that seems just really neat. So I wish you all the best with that too. And
Thank you very much. Yeah,
exploring yours.
That's great. So thanks very much, Dave. And please let us know once you've got everything out and when your new stuff is coming out as well, because I'd love to get you on the show again and talk some more.
Great. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another captivating episode of the Page Turnerz Podcast. We hope you enjoyed delving into the pages with us, discovering new stories, and revisiting beloved classics. If you're as passionate about books as we are, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback keeps us bringing you fascinating discussions, author interviews, and book recommendations. Remember, the adventure never ends when you have a book in hand. Until next time, keep turning those pages and let the magic of storytelling continue to inspire your imagination. Happy reading.